Hello everyone and welcome to this pre-recorded interview that is part of the Grand Multiliteracy event 2024. It's an event that brings together researchers and expert practitioners in the field of multilingualism to answer all your questions about multilingual literacy. Back in May, when I asked you about the challenges you're facing or the questions you had, many of you parents told me that although you value multilingualism, the schools your children were going to did not value it much or at all. And there are also teachers who told me that they do already things for their multilingual students to value their cultures, languages in school, and who wanted more ideas of what they can do in their schools. So I reached out to different experts in the field, and they're going to be sharing with us what they do, but also how it impacts their students and the school in general. And Dr. Esther Bettney Heidt and Marijke Rivers-Andries are two of them. Dr. Bettney Heidt is a school network researcher at the Multilingual Learning Research Center, which is located within the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Education. What I like about the way the MLRC works is that the schools come to them with what they want to focus on. And then Dr. Bettney Heidt and her team group the schools of their network together to work on the same topic so they can compare things with each other. And this is how Marijke and Esther started working together. And Marijke Rivers-Andries is the middle school EAL coordinator at TASIS England. She does a lot in her teaching to welcome her students' languages and cultures so their whole identity is valued. So I'm sure you pick up a few ideas for your own school from what she shares with us today. As an EAL coordinator, she also organizes workshops for parents to discuss English language learning and multilingualism. As this interview is pre-recorded, if you have any questions you would like to ask Esther or Marijke, write them in the comments below and I will relay them to them. And now, without further ado, let's get into this interview. So good morning, Esther, and good afternoon, Marijke. Thank you very much for being here with us for the Grand Multiliteracy event. And I'm really happy to talk to you too, to talk about how schools can do a bit better in being more inclusive for multilingual students. And so to start with, Esther, could you explain what you do? And then Marijke, if you can say what you do as when you're in your school.
Sure, I'm happy to. So I'm a school network researcher at the Multilingual Learning Research Center, which we often call the MLRC, just a little bit shorter. And so we're a relatively new research center based at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We started in 2023. And so the mission of the MLRC is to advance educational outcomes for multilingual learners. And we do that through innovative and socially just research and research practice partnerships. And it grew out of the work of WIDA International, which was a group of international schools that were focused on the use of WIDA's English assessments. And as part of that, there were a lot of questions outside of the field of assessments that international schools had around language. And so we had the opportunity to launch this new research center. And I'm primarily work in the MLRC school network, and that's a global network of about 180 independent and international schools, and that's across 60 countries. And TASIS England is one of those schools that we work with. And what we do with those schools is we're really focused on bridging the gap between research and practice, so providing opportunities for teachers to engage in and with research. And so we do that in a couple of different ways, some of which Marijke and I are engaged in together by writing together. We hold research symposia, which are in-person 2-day workshops where teachers have the opportunity to engage with research and then design their own action research projects as well. And we're just getting started. So this is, we've just finished, I guess, year 1. So we're just headed into year 2. So more to come, but that's kind of what we've been up to in this first year at least.
Okay, wow. Yeah, so it's very recent, but you've done already quite a lot, and you have a big network of schools already.
Yeah, and a lot of those schools, like TASIS England being one of them, a lot of those schools came from our relationship previously established. Myself and my MLRC colleague, John Nordemeyer, both worked with WIDA International, so lots of those relationships had been established, and many of our schools in the MLRC school network still use WIDA assessments, but not all of them do, and our focus is quite broad now on multilingual teaching and learning, of which we know assessment is one piece of it, but there's a lot more to that big picture.
My name is Marijke, and I am the middle school EAL coordinator at TASIS England, which is an American school in the UK.
Thank you very much. So Marijke, I would like to start first with you because you're working in a school. And so in your school, there are, I guess, monolingual students, but also multilingual students. Could you tell us, so in the middle school, what's the percentage of monolinguals, multilinguals, and why you started working with Esther?
Okay, so yes, we are a school that has three parts. So we follow the American system. So we have a lower school, middle school, and upper school or high school. So for people based in the UK, that means the equivalent of is grade 5 to grade 8, which is year 6 to year 9. And in the middle school, we're about to start a new school year, but we're on average at about 130 students. And to our own surprise, about more than 70% of those speak a different language at home. They could be completely fluent in English. They could be that they were never part of an EAL program, but they do speak at least one different language at home. About 10% of 130 students are actually in the EAL program, so students who need some additional help with English. But I guess my role is more to bring the multilingualism to the forefront of the school, the parents, the teachers, and the students themselves, that being multilingual doesn't just mean that you're in the EAL program. That multilingual is something to be very proud of, and that it's part of your identity, and that it's not something to just hide away. That was the first part of your question, wasn't it? Yeah.
Was that something that was happening before, that so students who were in the EAL section were not very proud of being there, or?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a general feeling sometimes, that EAL is seen as a remedial thing. I'm not ready yet to be, you know, able to write an essay. I am not ready yet to be in those certain classes because I don't understand what the teacher's saying. Whereas I want to contradict that and say, but you just don't understand the language, but you definitely have the knowledge and the skills. So it's about showing them that they can use their own language in the classroom just as much. You know, I often laugh with the kids and say, you can absolutely do your history project in your home language. The only reason you can't is because your teacher doesn't speak your language. Otherwise, you would be able to. So that's where I think there needs to be a shift. And I think that a lot of schools are making that shift, but it definitely used to be like that. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. It's because your teacher can't understand your language that you have to do it in the language they understand.
Yeah, absolutely. The most commonly used language. Yeah, and of course, you know, some students or parents would then say, yes, but they're here to learn English. And I say, yes, they are. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that they should stop developing their own language or using their own language.
Okay. And so the second part of my question was, why did you start working with Esther?
Yes. So we're a WIDA school. So WIDA is a framework with an assessment that we use throughout the entire school. And so we used to work with John and Esther as part of the international section of that. And then they moved on to creating this incredible Multilingual Learning Research Center. And I really wanted to be part of it because international schools and multilingual students are so unique that sometimes finding the right research and finding the right tools is really difficult. So Esther has been an absolute godsend in helping me find the right way and just brainstorming together in how to be more inclusive. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. So you were talking about changing the vision of what being multilingual means. Was it easy? Did you have any pushback from students, teachers, or parents?
Well, yes and no, I guess, because it's an American school where it's become a lot more international over the years, but the main language is English.
Yeah.
So I work a lot and very closely with the teachers to help them understand how things are changing, because the EAL world, the multilingualism world, has changed so much over the last few years. And it really is about looking at changing the thinking of a deficit towards an asset, right? So EAL is what student can't do, multilingual is what the student can do. When I spoke to teachers last year, something they found very powerful is that saying to them that if you actually ask students to only use English, you're actually asking them to leave part of their identity at the door.
Right.
And that means that at that moment, they're not equal anymore to their English-speaking peers. They need to be able, when in an English classroom, in an English literature classroom, when they're reading a book, why can't they read the translation of it? They can still discuss with the class what's going on, but to be able to understand the depth of the literature, it seems really natural to me they would be reading that book in their home language. So there will always be some pushback, but I think as long as you can show examples, show research, and show that the kids are loving it and are enjoying it, then that will change. The students themselves need to learn that as well, though, because they also, they want to be as fluent in English as possible. In my case, sometimes they even ask me to give them an American accent because they want to fit in. So it's again about going back to who they are and making them proud of who they are. And then thirdly is I also work with the parents. So it's about getting the parents into school, showing the parents what their kids can do, because most parents are really worried about putting their child in an English-speaking school. So showing them that supporting their home language at home actually makes sense, again, through examples and research, it really does help, and it does change the mindset of the school. It doesn't happen one day to the next, but it does happen, definitely.
Yeah, I've heard a lot from teachers who work in international schools, who say that they are in the school, they are very positive about multilingualism, but they get some pushback from parents who say, but we send our children to your school so that they can learn or they can speak English. Why do you want them to speak our home language?
Yeah, you get that absolutely. And that's when you need to explain why. That's when you explain that the home language helps develop English. And, that's when you go into details and show them student work and show them that, because I think what parents then sometimes think is that we completely abandon English and that we get their home language, like teachers in that speak their home language and they don't hear English anymore. So it's about showing them that it's all about being inclusive and getting the kids on the same level of equality and equity.
And I believe that you and Esther, you worked especially on the policies in your school to be more inclusive.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
both have worked in the area of language policy, but Marijke, why don't you maybe talk about what's happening at your school, and then I can talk about kind of broadly what I've been doing across different schools.
Yeah, our policy will be changed next year. I think there'll be a big project for the school year coming. We wrote an EAL handbook, which didn't really exist in 2016. So now we need to change the policy, which is a language policy that also talks about the modern foreign languages we teach at school. The big change for us will be, I think, again, changing the language, looking not talking about EAL students, but talking about multilingual students. So that will be our big push next year, and then hopefully we can do some work with Esther on that as well, so we can work together on it, so we can get some input from other schools to see how we do this and what best practice is. Yeah.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
so I'm happy to share about what we have been doing at the MLRC, and we're excited for Marijke's school to be joining us next year. We've started this past year, again, our first year as a research center. We have 3 kind of key research topics that we work across, which has been translanguaging, teacher collaboration, and inclusive EAL, which looks at the intersection of multilingualism and neurodiversity. And language policy wasn't actually one of the research topics that we had chosen for a variety of reasons, but we had a number of our member schools saying, we'd really like to dive into some research around language policies. What exists? Could you send us something? Could you have a look at our language policy? And so John and I, my colleague, got together and said, this is something that our members are asking for that's important to them. Let's start a working group around language policy, just with those people who so far had asked, because we wanted to start with a small group and kind of see how it goes. So this past year, I've been meeting with that group of 5 schools, and they're really at a wide range of kind of their journey in language policies. Some already have a well-established language policy, but are looking for new and relevant research to ensure that their current language policy lines up with the research that maybe they weren't, familiar with, or has come out since that policy was written, and are looking to revise it, where others are really new in that journey. So we have some schools participating in the group who don't yet have a language policy, at least an explicit one. We know in schools that there are implicit language policies that might not be written down, but maybe students, are told by a teacher, well, this is English class, so you have to speak in English. So whether that's a written policy or not, it is a language policy that's being enacted at the school. And so in the case of schools that don't yet have a written language policy, it's again, digging into that research, looking at the policies that are shared by other schools and saying, what are our values as a school around multilingualism? And right now, as a group, we've been laying out kind of a process that you might engage in. So if you were either starting out or you wanting to revise your language policy, what might be the first step? And so, that might be asking parents, students, teachers, your community about their beliefs about language, and then looking, okay, does our policy align with that or not? Digging in, to the research. There's not a lot of research about language policies in international schools, but there's some. And there's also research about language policies in other contexts, that we can learn from and draw from. So it's been terrific to work with that small group, because it, really is a really wide range, and people are, sharing across that group, and we're giving feedback to each other. But we have a couple of schools that, since that group have started, have said hey, we're looking at language policies. And so that group, we imagine, will grow going in to this year, and we're working on some writing together and working on some tools that we'll be able to share more broadly. So it's definitely an important topic within the context of international schools. Lots of schools asking really important questions, and we do see a real range. There are still schools that are following a pretty strict English only policy for teachers and students, but I would say there's, like Marijke mentioned, there's been significant shifts in the field, and we see a lot of schools asking questions about what is the role of home languages, what role do they play at the school, how can we make sure that students don't feel like they have to leave pieces of who they are outside of the classroom.
It's really, I guess it's a really important topic, policies, because it's what enables everyone to be aligned and to understand, okay, that's how we work in this school all together.
Yeah,
And
I think
so, sorry, you
no, go
have
ahead.
a wide range of schools in your network. Do you have, like you said, there are some schools who are still very strict with only English in school. Do you have some of these schools who have joined your research center to understand more how to make this shift, or is it more schools who are already doing things and who want to do it maybe better, to be guided or to compare?
Yeah, great question. I would say we have the entire range of schools that join. I think, you know, we're very open, you know, if you look at our website and, you know, any of the things that we post on social media, I think, it's clear what our center is about is supporting multilingual learners. That's, you know, that's what we do, all of the research that we do. And we also have a colleague who works primarily in the US context and is focused on more, I want to say traditional, but actually what she's doing is some really innovative work around simulations in language learning. But we have some different aspects of research that are happening within the center. But I think that schools that want to, you know, participate, they want to participate because they want to support their multilingual students. You know, that's the primary reason that schools join the center. But I think where schools are at across that range is varied. And also, and I'm sure Marijke can speak to that, within each individual school, it's also, you know, really varied people's understanding of language, their thoughts on multilingualism. So you might have within, you know, an individual school some kind of conflicting ideas about, you know, where the school should go and what are the values. And so I think, you know, as we've been thinking about within this language policy working group, that has been part of why kind of that initial step is asking questions and like checking with your community. What are those different views about language? Because I think, you know, the intention, like you said, is a language policy to be a unifying force, you know, across a school, to say like, okay, this is what we as a school believe, this is how we're going to engage together in language. But we know with any type, you know, of policy, there's the policy and then there's what, you know, what happens and how that policy is enacted. And so I think that it's really important that, you know, throughout that process, that the policy, you know, is a reflection of what is happening within the school, because otherwise, you know, we all hear about policies that exist that people don't even know that they exist, so they're not being, you know, enacted at the school. So I think those conversations all the way along, and, you know, when there's a draft, checking back in with students, with parents, with teachers, and saying like, does this reflect our community? But I think as Marijke said, like sharing the research about the, you know, positive aspects of multilingualism with, you know, with parents who, you know, have questions, or maybe even with your fellow colleagues, I think is really powerful, because there's been real shifts, you know, in the field of multilingualism. It used to be believed that if you're learning one language, that's going to have a negative impact on the other language. And we know now that's not actually the case, that languages support each other. So I think sharing that research and saying like, you know, we know new things now about multilingualism and about how languages work, that can be a really powerful way of supporting those shifts as well.
Thank you very much. Marijke, I wanted to ask you a bit more precisely about so this shift you're on, so this transformation of your school. So you said the policies is like you're going to talk about it next year, but you have already put things in place, and you say that there is a good response from students. Could you give some examples of things you have put in place and what kind of impact you have seen?
Yeah, so there's two really big things that I've put in place. One is I wanted to get the student voice out to show them that, you know, the EAL students, multilingual students, they are not, that there are far more in the middle school, first of all, and that they should be proud. So we created, our lower school started a few years before us, and we've continued it with them. We now have a language ambassadors program, which is a program that includes every student who speaks a different language at home, who want to be, if they want to be part of the program, they sign up, and we meet once a week, and we come up with some creative things we can do in the school to raise raise awareness for multilingualism. And I was really surprised that in our first year, I had about 17 students who put their hands up to join in. And now we're a very established group of about 14 kids, because of course kids come and go. And they're very, very proud. They have their own lanyard with the flags on it, and they help at the start of the school year. For example, we've got a picnic for new families. They come and help out. They make sure that new students and parents feel welcome. Last year we started a language of the week, so that every week we had a different language that students learn to say hello and goodbye in, so they have to greet each other at the start of class. All these little things. We would have a little quiz where they would have to connect, as in advisories or tutor groups, they had to connect the right flag to the country, to the students that speak that language in the middle school, and the advisory that got it first won a prize. And it's just all these little things that the students come up with to just get that profile of the fact that we're an international school, that we are a multilingual school, to put that more on the forefront, that it's not just once a year in Mother Languages Day or International Languages Day, we do a presentation in assembly, or we bring food in and we hang the flags up, you know, those kinds of things. But it's about showing every day what students do, and it's student voice, and that's what I love. It's all coming from the kids, which is wonderful. I've really stepped back and I just mentor them, but they do it. So yeah, that's the biggest student voice aspect of things that we've created over the last 2 years now. And then the other thing that I've done, and that's where Esther comes in as well, I've started over the last 2-3 years, I've become more and more aware of translanguaging, which is more than just translating. I do it a lot in my classes with my kids, so the complete beginner English levels, but also a more advanced, where we just, wherever we can, we get their home language involved. And it can be things like, it can be big projects, like we've looked at all the parts of speech, and then we translate one sentence in every single home language, and then we find those parts of speech, and then we find out why they're in a certain part of the sentence. So a Spanish student would ask me why the adjective is in front of the noun, because they're used to have it the other way round. And it generates incredible conversations. But again, the most important thing is it validates them and who they are. It brings their identity into the classroom. Those are big projects.
Oh, sorry. I was going to add, it also helps them learn better, because if they can compare, for example, Spanish and English, then they can see, okay, these are the differences they are, and then they understand better their language, their home language, but also the new language they are learning.
Absolutely. And on top of that, I want to add is you know, when you teach a lesson and it went so well, and it wasn't planned, it all kind of happened naturally. And then you take that into the staff room and over lunch, and you're talking to a colleague. And that's what happened when I did it the first time 2 years ago. I was talking to my English colleague, and she said, actually, could you share that with me? Because, well, this student always reverses adjective and noun, and I've always been correcting it. But actually, they're not just making a mistake. What they're doing is they're translating. So I started adding it since last year. I've been adding it to their student profiles, so that teachers now use it and know that actually that's not a mistake they're making. It's what they are transferring from their home language. So it's something that the teachers can learn from just as much as the students do themselves.
Okay. Thank you. And so, because this event is about multilingual literacy, I was also wondering what's the space there is for the written language. So you in class or maybe in school. So you talked, for example, about the fact that you had this little activity where they were translating one sentence, all the languages in the class. So I guess in your lessons, because you're EAL teacher, this is maybe more present, or is it like in every subject that you're like their languages are present in a written?
No, so it's mostly something I do at the moment. My goal for next year is to get it into the classroom. And that's where Esther and I have been working hard together. So we've written a paper about it. I'm sure that Esther can talk about it a bit more in a minute as well, because that's my dream. My dream is that teachers understand that this is good practice. I think that a lot of teachers assume that it's only the students who don't have any English that need the home language in the classroom.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes teachers are a bit scared of bringing that home language because they don't actually understand what's being said or written down. So I think it's that barrier that we need to cross. You know, things like when they're writing a story in English, of course, it's actually a really good practice to be brainstorming in their home language, and maybe even a combination of their home language and English. I know that I do it when I'm really brainstorming and thinking, oh, my two languages just mix up, because you want to use the entire repertoire of vocabulary that you have. In a history project, you know, when the teacher gives them websites to use to do research on, I always try and find home language websites. So that's when I use high school students who speak that language. They then come and help me to find the right resources because I don't know. And I think that's the first thing as a teacher, being able to say, I don't know what it is in your language. I can't speak Japanese. I can't read Russian, but I'll find a way to help you. And that's my main goal for next year. I hope my teachers are ready because that's what we're going to be focusing on next year.
There is one thing you just said that I think many teachers who are even bilingual, multilingual miss sometimes or forget is that us as adults, when we speak different languages, even if it's, for example, something very simple like putting a shopping list together, we might mix up our languages, but we don't think it's bad or anything. We just do it naturally. But somehow when we ask us, when it's in the classroom and we get our students to do it, it becomes like no, it needs to be in one language. But yeah, as adults, we do it naturally. So we should let our students do it naturally as well.
Yeah, I think it's an incredible skill.
Yeah.
Kids who can do that.
Yeah. And are, for example, assessments translated in the home languages or for example, do you have this or not yet?
Yeah, so students, mostly that's for students who, again, it's something I'd love to see across the board. At the moment, it's something that happens for students who are complete beginners. So yeah, teachers might, I know the science teachers, for example, they give, with the differentiator test, they might add the key vocabulary in their home language with the test.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things do definitely happen, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And another thing to do with the written language is so books. Do you have a multilingual library in your school or not yet?
We're starting to. So we have a multilingual section in our library with books, all languages. A lot of time we have families who move on that then donate their books, which is wonderful. One of my projects, I think, for a bit later down the line is to actually, instead of having a multilingual section, is to have it all integrated so that you have all the Harry Potter books in the Harry Potter section, in the fantasy section, but all the languages mixed up.
Oh, wow.
Because it's about inclusivity, isn't it? It's about equity. A student shouldn't feel like they have to go to the other side of the library because that's where their books are. No, they should be finding the books where they want to find them by genre and how they need to look them up and find them there. So that's a bigger project that we're looking into. Yeah.
That's something I've been doing at home as well with my sons. So we have French, English, and Korean. And instead of separating them by language, we just kept them with the same type of books. So like, I don't know, fairy tales would be together, the comic books and manga would be together, etc. So it just, because they're from them, it's like, what do I want to read now? Is it like an adventure book or something? Then they go and look, and the language is just what helps them get to the story. It's not necessarily something to separate.
Yeah.
And so before you said so that Esther and you have written a paper on how you use languages. Esther, do you want to talk a bit about that?
Sure, I'm happy to. And actually, we're very excited because we've just submitted it, but I hope by the time this interview is out into the world, you'll be able to go and read it. So we wrote an article for NALDIC, which
Oh, yeah.
maybe Marijke can help me with what the acronym. I feel like I always get the acronyms mixed up, but it is a UK-based organization which supports and advocates for multilingual students, and they have become more focused outside of the UK and in international schools as well. And so Marijke and I had the opportunity to write an article for their blog, which really highlights what Marijke is doing in her classroom. And so some of the really amazing practices around translanguaging. And I think part of how we decided to collaborate on this article is that, within the field of international schools, and other schools as well, there's a lot of talk about, translanguaging, and it's kind of become this like hot topic in the field of languages. But I think kind of behind that, there's a lot of like, but what is it? Like, what exactly are we talking about when we're talking about translanguaging? And so I think what we look at in the article are thinking about what translanguaging pedagogies that Marijke is already using in her classroom. And like she said, many of them, come very naturally out of the questions that students have and in responding to that. But I think, like we've been talking about, the other piece of translanguaging is recognizing that it is the practices that multilinguals engage in. So like we were just, saying, as adults that speak, more than one language, we move freely between those languages and don't see that as problematic. But then it comes to school and we're like, nope, this is English class, so we can only, draw on English. So the article is really looking kind of as a way of demystifying, what is translanguaging and what could that look like in the classroom. So it's a very practical article. There's, pictures in it so teachers can actually look and see with Marijke's descriptions, of this is what's happening. So I think our hope with that article is that maybe breaking down some of that, fear of allowing for, other languages in the classroom. And I think, as teachers, obviously we want to be competent and be professionals. And so sometimes it's kind of hard to open our classrooms, to things that maybe we don't feel as comfortable or as familiar with. But I think that the, article gives some really practical ways that any teacher, regardless of their language background, can provide opportunities for students to be drawing on all of their linguistic repertoire to learn and to connect. So that's really the intention of the article. It's very practical, lots of examples, pictures, so people can see translanguaging in action in Marijke's classroom.
Great. Yeah, I want to do the same in my school to start explaining to other teachers what translanguaging is. So I probably use that as a resource.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
We imagine that that's
Perfect.
what it can be used for.
I just wanted to add, actually, if that's okay, is
Yeah.
that in the classroom, it doesn't have to be a big project that you've planned beforehand. Sometimes it comes from little things. I remember talking about leap year and the students asking, but what does that mean? And then they translated it and then realized that it actually meant the exact same thing. It can be, you can let a student feel included immediately, or just sometimes to ask them, oh, what does that mean in your language? Or what's that word actually? And then help ask them, how do I say that? And that right there starts that connection and begins everything. Just that quick, how do I say that in your language? And then making some connections, and then whatever questions come out of that can become a whole thing. But it doesn't need to be this whole planned project. It can be as small as that.
Yeah, and I think you're highlighting something that's very important, is to embed the habit of starting to think in different languages, because then you can have light bulb moments about, okay, I understand this now, or like just by thinking two languages can help us see one problem from different angles, so it helps us understand better. And yeah, so there are probably schools or teachers who work in schools that are going to watch this interview. who are not international schools, but who have maybe heard of translanguaging or who have loads of multilingual students in their schools. What do you think they could do as first steps to start, maybe before thinking of big things, what are small things they can do to be more inclusive?
I think first of all is getting to know your students, finding out what their background is. And, you know, you can start, if your school does it, you can start with looking at admissions forms, but they only tell you so much. Ask the student what their identity is, the languages that they speak, because it happens sometimes that their identity might be different to what their parents think, because yes, they only lived in a certain country for 2 years, but they're only 10 years old. So 2 years of those 10 years is a big deal. So they might feel a lot more connected to a certain country than their parents think. They just think we've traveled so much, those 2 years, they weren't important, when they actually really were to the child. So I think that's where it all begins, that connection with the students and the basics of being able to say hello and how are you in their language, and showing them and making yourself vulnerable, you know, not being able to pronounce it and have a good laugh about it, I think is where those connections start. And that's where everything starts. It's you showing interest in their entire identity, and asking them. You don't need to know everything. Ask them, because you don't know, and it's really nice for the students to be able to explain things to you. Same as to connect with the parents as well.
Yeah, just to go along with what Marijke is saying, I think that you know, is such an example of an asset-based approach, right? That we see, you know, from the baseline, that we care about our students, that we want to know about our students, and that we believe that multilingualism, you know, is a gift. It's not a problem. It's not like something that needs to be solved. It's a gift in families. It's a gift for students. And so I think if that's, you know, our starting point in how we approach conversations with students and conversations with parents, it's very different, you know, than approach that maybe was more common, you know, in the past, but we know unfortunately still does exist, of thinking like, okay, well, but how quickly can we get this student to English proficiency? Because that's really, you know, what matters. And so I think like flipping that on its head and saying, you know, yes, we recognize, you know, that you want your student to develop proficiency, you know, in English. And we of course are going to support your student, your child, in developing that proficiency at the same time as we support their proficiency and their development across their languages, because we know that those, you know, are mutually supportive. So I think that like starting from that, you know, that belief about multilingualism as a positive, and I think that we really have to be advocates within our schools. And so if, you know, as you talked about, maybe there's a teacher who's watching and thinks like, well, I believe that, but I'm not sure what my colleagues, you know, believe. I imagine that you'll start, you know, as you talk about it and as you kind of open the doors to those conversations, you'll find, you know, other people that will say like, oh, you know, actually my parents, I grew up speaking, you know, this language. And so, you know, I think opening that door to say, you know, how as a school can we really embrace this belief about multilingualism as a positive? And then how can we make sure our practices reflect that? But I think that if we, you know, don't first address those beliefs, it can be very, you know, difficult to kind of keep pushing for the practices. They have to come out of that belief that multilingualism is a positive, and that we want to, you know, support and encourage that in students and in families.
And I guess there are some people as well who see it as a positive, but maybe, okay, when the students are going to be older and they get jobs, it might be better, but they need to realize it's positive even right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it allows you, like you said, you know, allows you to see things from, you know, from different perspectives. And, you know, my own children are bilingual, and we live in Colombia, and they study in Spanish. And sometimes, you they've said before, like, oh, well, but if I don't know, that word, in Spanish, I only know it in English, or the opposite, I only know it in English, I only know it in Spanish. I say, like, but like, how amazing is it if you think across all of the vocabulary that you have between both languages, like, that's pretty amazing, and so kind of reframing that. And of course we say, like, sure, let me help you learn that word. We're not gonna not encourage students to expand their vocabulary, in all of those languages. But I think reframing that as, instead of comparing students to monolingual norms, to look across and say, like, you're multilingual, that means you use language in different ways. And isn't that an amazing resource that you have for life, like you said, not just as a, oh, maybe in the future this will help you with a job. It's really an amazing gift, now, not just in the future as well.
Yeah. And so to finish up, so I was wondering if you could describe a bit how you work with schools, how schools could work with you. Because so I know that in Marijke's school, so Marijke's schools work with you, but you have loads of different schools. You have some that are international schools. I guess others that are not international schools as well, or is it just international schools?
Yeah, happy to talk about that. So we work primarily with international and independent schools. And I think, that's an interesting term, because international schools, there's a real, shift even in how that's defined, and what in international schools maybe traditionally look like and what they look like now is very, very different. And even schools within a local public system likely have a much more diverse and multilingual student population than they had, in the past. But our focus has been on independent and international schools, partly because there's a real sense of, isolation in those schools, because they often don't have maybe a state or a province that's providing some guidance for them around, in this case, multilingual teaching and learning, because they tend to be more independent. And so part of why within the school network we have focused on independent and international schools is to really help kind of fill that gap of being able to bring research and practice together for those schools that maybe don't necessarily have those same type of opportunities within some type of department. So that has been kind of our focus, but we continue to see, all over the world, schools and members approach who are, who are just interested in the research around multilingual teaching and learning. And so we continue to, again, we're only in our first year, but we imagine that will grow and expand. But we also, we have kind of the school network and the work that we do. And then we also have a lot of, research and resources that we publish through our website, and that we share through conferences and such, and that really reaches much beyond our members. So there really are lots of opportunities to connect. I know both Marijke and I are active on LinkedIn, and in our case, the MLRC website is a great place to connect as well. But I think both Marijke and I are really interested in connecting with other teachers and researchers who are also asking these, important questions about how we can better support multilingual learners across, any school context. I think that's what really the interest is that, we care about supporting multilingual students wherever they are. And that's what, committed to in terms of the research about it.
I think what I understood as well from what you explained before is that a school can come to you with saying, I want to focus on this, I want to focus on language policies, I want to focus on whatever, and then you help them establish whatever they want. Is that correct?
Yeah, so one of the really exciting things that we've been doing this past year is that through the research symposium that I mentioned, so which are these 2-day in-person workshops. We meet with and engage with teachers, and we look at some of, the current research that exists around multilingual teaching and learning. But then we also look at capacity building for action research, which is really an opportunity for, like you said, for people to identify, what are the questions that matter within our particular school context. And so then we go through a process together of how do we identify those questions and how would we answer those questions? What kind of data would you need to collect so that you can answer that question? And so, for example, one of the schools that we worked with this year had questions around translanguaging, but within the context of a dual language program that their school had recently launched, and saying like, okay, we don't want to just translate, between the two instructional languages. So what would it mean to engage in translanguaging pedagogies across that program? And so, together with them designed that project, and then they gathered the data and analyzed the data, and came up with some findings to inform their particular school context. But then we'll also have the opportunity, to write and to share about that, because there are other schools that are asking those similar types of questions. So action research has been, something that we have identified as a real important area, because instead of it being, this is research that's taken place in other contexts, it's teachers being able to identify, like, in my context, here's what matters to me, and here are some tools so that I can gather data to answer the questions that I have. So that's been probably one of my favorite parts actually of my job, is being able to support teachers and engaging in action research, because again, it's professional learning too for teachers that matters to them. It's not someone else saying, yeah, exactly. It's like, you have this question about your school or your classroom, and here's a way that you can engage, in figuring that question out. So I think it's very empowering for teachers to be able to engage in research about their own classrooms.
Thank you very much. And just to finish, I was wondering if you had any last thoughts or anything we haven't covered that you think it's really important that teachers understand that, or parents who are going to be watching.
I would say start small. Like I said earlier, just try it. If you want to try the translanguaging, if you want to be a bit more aware of multilingualism, try small, start small, talk to your students, find out what their identity is and how you can help them. To parents, I would say keep reading in your home language, keep talking in your home language. I have a 4-year-old. I know it's really difficult, but especially at the end of a long day, but it is so important when they then sometimes talk back to you in their home language. It just makes it all worthwhile. So yes, parents keep reading, and teachers just start small, I would say.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I will, to go along with what Marijke said, just encourage teachers that, you're not on your own. It can feel very isolating. I started my own, career as a classroom teacher at a bilingual school in Honduras, and how I, ended up where I am today is that, I felt all alone. I thought, like, there have to be other people in the world that have these same, kind of questions that I do about, like, I don't feel like I'm supporting my students well as their English teacher, because I don't really, understand what would help them. And I think that, at the core of why we teach and why we're in education is because we want to help students. And so I think, that it can be very, very isolating, but I just want to encourage teachers, that there are other people that care about these things and that are asking these kinds of questions. And so not to feel that you have to figure this out on your own, but that, to reach out, whether it's to us, whether it's, to the things that you're doing, Yoshido. I think that there's there are opportunities to, to collaborate with others and to learn from others, so we don't feel so isolated in doing this work. And so I would just, encourage teachers to, to connect. We know teachers are so busy and have so much on their plates, but I think that connecting with others can really help relieve some of that burden of, I'm trying to figure this out all on my own for the sake of my students. And so I think that there are ways that we can support each other in this important work.
Thank you very much. So we're coming to the end of the hour, so we're going to stop here. But thank you very much for being here today and for sharing your experience with us.
Pleasure.
Thank you for having us and for this, wonderful event. I can't wait to watch all of the other recordings, and thank you for inviting us.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.